Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Beaumont Planning Commission Workshop. This is on February 13th, 2025. I will call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Cooley,
Here.
Commissioner Copeland,
Here.
Commissioner Cueva, Vice Chair Smith,
Here.
Chairman Southard.
Here. Okay. Do we have any action of any requests for excused absence?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Smith, will you lead us in that, please?
Hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
No adjustments.
Thank you. And any conflicts of interest to disclose? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item B, our public comment period. Any one person may address the Planning Commission on any matter on this agenda. If you wish to speak, please fill out a public comment form provided at the back of the table and give it to the city clerk. There's a 3-minute time limit on public comments. There will be no sharing or passing of time to another person. State law prohibits the Planning Commission from discussing or taking action brought up by your comments. Do we have any public comments tonight?
I have no written requests. Mia, do we have any callers on the line?
No callers.
Okay, thank you. That'll take us to item C, action items, and item C1 is Plan 2024-0068, Zoning Code Update Workshop Number 2, Capital Improvement Project CIP CD-04. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Chairman and Planning Commission. I am happy to introduce our consultant, Lisa Weiss Consulting. They have a presentation for you and a PowerPoint. We'll go through that, and then, as I mentioned yesterday, we, both staff, planning staff, and the peer review consultant will be offering up time with commissioners in the next 30 days to go over comments so that you have adequate time to review the document in its entirety. So I'll turn it over to Stefano.
Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint presentation here. Okay. Can you all see that there?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Fantastic. All right. Well, my name is Stefano Rikiki. I'm with Lisa Wise Consulting. We are the consultants helping to put together the comprehensive zoning code update for the city of Beaumont. We did, you all may recall, meet with you all back in July. It was a joint City Council and Planning Commission study session. This study session, of course, is just with the Planning Commission today, so we're excited to be here and excited to talk zoning. Okay, let me get to the next slide, excuse me. Okay, so you all know Carol, who just spoke. She is the project manager on the city side for this. She's also joined by many of her staff who's helping work on this project. Melody Archiga, Jillian Fountain, Katie Jensen, and Joseph Kale. As I mentioned, I'm the project manager for this project on the Lisa Wise Consulting side, joined by Jen Murillo and Abby Weiser, who are supporting me on this project. So many people are working on this project here. Just a quick overview of the agenda. I'm sharing the presentation now. We're going to talk about a little bit of background and overview for the zoning code update project. And then we'll get into a little bit more of the detail regarding what is the public review draft code and map that are now available, as Carol mentioned. And then we'll talk briefly about next steps. After that, of course, we'll address any comments and questions that you all have, and then have public comment and conclude. So going over the project timeline and background, we did kick off in January of last year. Since then, as I mentioned, during our analysis and recommendations phase, we did have a joint study session with you all, with the Planning Commission and the City Council as well. So that happened back in July of last year, and that was to discuss our recommendations report. Since then, we've prepared an administrative draft of the zoning code update and map that we worked with city staff on, and then we've made edits from that. And now we are in the public review period, the public review phase of this project, where we have the code ready for you and for the public to review, to digest, and comment on. So as shown on the screen, we're here at the second study session for this project. We will be meeting with the City Council for a third study session for this project in about a month, actually in a month, March 13th. And then when all that's done, we will take input from the Planning Commission, from the City Council, and from the public, and incorporate all that into what will become the public hearing draft of the zoning code and map. And then later this spring and potentially into early summer, we will go to adoption hearings and hopefully get this new code and map adopted. There are several goals and objectives, of course, for the project. One, we want to modernize the code and make it easier for everyone to use, so city staff, the public. We are also implementing the general plan through this zoning code update and a few other city policy documents that I'll describe here in a few slides. We also want to streamline the code to make it more succinct and better organized. And then the last bullet on here is, I think, particularly important to the city, creating industrial and commercial design standards to address aesthetic impacts. And we particularly focused on industrial design standards. The city does already have commercial design standards on the books. So just in terms of a little more background, as I mentioned, back in July, we did present our recommendations report to you all. And there were topics about reorganizing the code, clarifying and modifying zoning districts to be consistent with the general plan. We had recommendations regarding use regulations in terms of consolidating uses, and then development and design standards, administration and procedures. We did streamline some of the process as well in this zoning code process for development. So in addition to the general plan, we also looked at the housing element, the downtown Beaumont revitalization plan, the parking management master plan, and the economic development strategic plan as well in developing and drafting the code that is now available. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the details of what we've done. Our overall approach is to, as I mentioned, reorganize the code, and we'll talk about that on the next slide, but update definitions and land uses. Sometimes land uses are very specific and particular in codes, and we can use a more broader category to describe that use. You might have a candy store and a shoe store and a hat store, whatever it may be, right? Very, very specific. We don't need to get that detailed with our uses. We can just call all that retail, right? So that's part of what we did. We did replace archaic language. There's always here-ins, and I think I've seen a wheretofore, or there's weird language that gets into code. So we removed a lot of that archaic language, right? Modernized the code. We also simplified standards and procedures, incorporate a lot of tables and graphics. These are some examples here on the slide. But there are many tables, many graphics. We, as part of this, of course, we have the land use tables, but we also have development standards tables. We added graphics to the signs chapter in the code. So we want to make the code more visual and easier for people to understand. And then that last bullet there, we did update the code for consistency with state and federal law. So that's kind of our overall approach. In terms of the structure, one of the new things that we've done is include divisions for the code. So that's divisions form another level of organization within the code. So the divisions that we have are listed there. The first division, the general division, is kind of an introductory. It talks about the authority of the code, the purpose of the zoning code. Then we get into Division B, zone regulations, and that has to do with, as I mentioned, the use tables, allowable uses in various zones. the development standards required in various zones, and some supplemental standards as well. Division C is not so much zone specific as standards that apply citywide. So these have to do with things such as parking, landscaping, general development standards. The signs chapters is in there as well. And then we have standards that are particular to specific uses, but that apply citywide in Division C as well. Division D, Administration and Procedures. This has to do with your permits and approvals, noticing, and how all that functions within the city. And then Division E, Definitions. We have definitions of terms, definitions of uses, and then particular sign term definitions as well, because signs can get pretty specific. And then we do have a new numbering convention that does allow for future additions. So we numbered the chapters in increments of 2, so even numbered chapters. So in the future, this code implements a 2040 general plan, right? So in a decade or two, if within that time, if the city wants to add another chapter, that can fit in as an odd number within the code pretty easily. So that's a common practice of ours, is allow a little bit of space and a little bit of room for future edits, future additions. And then in adding these, the last thing I'll say on this slide is in adding these divisions, the divisions are included in the section reference, right, or the chapter reference for each chapter and section. So the example here, 17A, Title 17 is the zoning code for the city, Division A, then we have Chapter 2, Section 030, right? So that section is a purpose section within Division A. So that's the numbering convention that we followed within the code. So that was organization. In terms of actual content revisions, here are some notable revisions. As I mentioned, one of the primary goals of the zoning code update was to create new industrial design standards. So we've done that, and we have the section reference here, section 17B 12040. These are supplemental standards within the industrial zones. So I'll talk about that in greater detail, but I do encourage you to take a closer look at that too in your review of this public review draft zoning code. We also updated parking standards, added specific to use standards. I'll talk about all these in more detail on the next slides, but we have a tree preservation section included as well. We consolidated permit types. And then one of the other things we did is created these overlays within downtown for the single family residential and the traditional neighborhood zones to allow for increased density. And that's something that's consistent with the general plan as well. A little more density in downtown. So getting a little more specific in terms of these new industrial design standards that I mentioned, we do have standards regarding what the building entrance looks like, how it's oriented, placement standards for the entrance as well, and the facade. So as you can see in the graphic shown there are transparency requirements. We don't want just blank buildings, right? Or so we have added a requirement for transparency. And that next bullet, preventing continuous planes. We don't just want flat boxes, right? We want a little bit more detail with our industrial buildings to make them look a little nicer. So we also have standards regarding aesthetics, required open space. And then we did add references to the city's plus policy, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the policy on land use and sensitive receptors, as well as Assembly Bill 98. Those, the city's plus policy and AB 98, they don't have as much in the way of design standards, right? And so what we're doing here is really focusing in on the design and on the look of the buildings. But we do reference those other policies and that other bill within this section. We also have special standards for particularly large industrial and like warehousing uses over 80,000 square feet. So these have to do with standards for landscaping, outdoor seating, additional standards regarding loading requirements. And we did add something that we've used in other codes before, which is allowing these interim uses for vacant industrial parcels and structures. So if for whatever reason an industrial building is vacant or the parcel is vacant, there are these additional uses shown on the screen here, farmers markets, community gardens, that can be used in the interim until a new industrial use comes in. Parking's, something that always comes up in planning and in our zoning work. We did include some moderate reductions to the required number of parking spaces. So I do encourage you to take a look at this chapter. It's 17 CO6 as shown in the top right of the screen. But again, we reduced parking, but wanted to be selective in how we reduce those minimum parking requirements. So we took kind of a moderate approach there. We did, however, in downtown add a maximum number of parking spaces required. And this is something really that the general plan and the parking management master plan call for. Downtown, like traditional downtowns, right? We have policy guidance in these documents to promote a more compact, walkable downtown in which people gather and shop and try to reduce a little bit of the asphalt and pavement in downtown. So those are the cues that we took from the parking management master plan and the general plan as well for downtown. And then lastly, regarding parking, at least on this slide, is we did reduce the parking stall sizes. They were a little larger than what we normally see and would recommend. So we did shave off a foot or two of those parking stall sizes as well. Continuing on with parking, we did include some best practices such as alternative parking strategies. Some of those include shared parking standards. So this has to do with peak demand for various uses. So the demand for parking, say at an office, the time of day that peak demand is going to occur is different than when parking is most needed for a restaurant, say. So we do have a table in the zoning code allowing for certain parking reductions if a couple of uses can share parking together and in cases where that makes sense. And we also have additional parking sections regarding car share and bicycle parking, as well as electrical vehicle charging spaces. Lastly, kind of regarding transportation parking, we did include provisions for transportation demand management. So these are trip reduction, particularly vehicular trip reduction measures. The city already has this for commercial and industrial uses. We did add some transportation demand management requirements for residential uses, particularly residential uses, subdivisions of 20 or more, 20 or more homes is when we require certain trip reduction measures. In part is to promote walkability and other active forms of transportation, but also to reduce the traffic impacts that come about with new residential development. I mentioned at some point specific to use standards, going into a little more detail here. These are special standards for certain uses, so I'm sure you're all familiar with accessory dwelling units, ADUs. We also added standards relative to restaurant uses and alcohol serving uses, particularly regarding outdoor dining, right? Outdoor dining has become pretty popular in the United States since COVID. So we do have outdoor dining provisions there. And then we added standards for drive-through facilities, home occupations, which I understand is something that the city is currently discussing. So we'll look forward to making additional edits as needed to that home occupation section. Then otherwise, we added sections regarding temporary uses and two-unit developments. Two-unit developments are related to SB 9, Senate Bill 9, that you may be familiar with as well. And those are just some examples. We do have, of course, more sections that have standards specific to particular uses. And that's in Chapter 17, C10, as shown on the screen. So getting into a little more detail regarding some examples. For drive-through facilities, we have drive-through aisle standards, landscaping, and pedestrian walkways, but we did add a separation between drive-through facilities, particularly for drive-throughs for fast food uses. So some cities want to discourage an over-concentration of drive-throughs, and so this is something that we've added into this draft code. And then similarly for gas or service stations, there is a separation buffer that we included, but that is particular to downtown only. It's 1,000-foot buffer from gas stations within downtown, and this would apply to new gas stations. And then setbacks for pump islands, landscaping, and lighting were other provisions that we included regarding gas and service stations. Another thing that's new that we added to the code was a section regarding tree preservation. So this would require, the intent of this is to preserve older, beautiful trees. And so there are exemptions. You don't need to get a tree removal permit if you're just pruning your tree or removing a dead tree, or smaller trees with smaller diameter trees. But there are certain findings that the planning director would have to make in order to issue tree removal permits in cases where the tree removal was not exempt. So if a tree is dying, or if removal of the tree is necessary for defensible space, for fire purposes, tree damaging sidewalks, those would be reasons to give a tree removal permit. And again, there are exemptions for having to get that permit as well. In terms of administration and procedures, one of our tasks was to streamline the code. And so we did create a minor use permit and temporary use permit. So these are approvals that can be approved at the staff level. So unlike a conditional use permit, for these types of permits, you don't need a public hearing. Although we do have conditional use permits still for certain uses within the code. We also consolidated the plot plans into the minor and major plot plans. So we did remove the administrative plot plan as well. So trying to have one fewer permit type there. We didn't think the administrative plot plan was necessary, and that can largely be covered by this minor plot plan. So again, we're trying to consolidate, but in other cases where we did add new permits, it is to streamline development where it makes sense, where appropriate for those uses. And then we do have a consistent structure for all of the permits and approvals within the code as well. Again, we're trying to make the code easier for everyone to use and understand. I only have one slide on the zoning map here. There wasn't too much that we did except for create the downtown overlays that I described earlier, the single-family residential and traditional neighborhood overlays. And these are for added density within downtown, consistent with the general plan. But there are other overlays that we did map as well, the higher density overlay and housing sites overlay. Those are included in that inset in downtown, and those overlays come from the housing element. And so the map was just a little harder to read, right, and to see the overlays. So that's why we included that inset map within downtown to make that a little easier to see as well. So we're getting close to the end of the presentation here. Just wanted to talk about next steps. So the public review period for the project does start today with this meeting. We're kind of kicking off the public review period here. And that's going to run for about a month to March 17th. After that, City Council study session on March 13th that's shown on the slide as well. And that's typical to have about a month public review period as well for these. During this public review period, staff is making themselves available on Mondays from 1 to 3 p.m. to talk with the public, face to face or online if public chooses, to answer any questions or comments or hear any comments that the public may have. And then we are anticipating adoption hearings later this spring. We're hoping to have this adopted in June or July of this year. And that's consistent with the City Council's 18-month time frame that they wanted for this project. As I mentioned earlier, we did kick off in January of last year and hoping to wrap up later this spring, early this summer. And then, as I said, of course, based on the feedback that we get during this public review period, we'll make edits. Of course, feedback from you all, from the Planning Commission, from City Council, and from the public for that next draft, which is the public hearing draft. And that's all I had. So we're happy to answer any comments or questions that you may have. We're here for those. And I'll turn it back over to Carol. Thank you.
Does the commission have any questions for staff or our consultants? I know it's a lot of material.
Several. So the goals that we have in here, definitely understand it. Does staff feel that this document meets those goals as far as easier to read and interpret from your perspective as well as from the public's perspective?
From my perspective, yes. I think the way it looks is definitely going to be well received by our community, our citizens that are trying to, figure out if they can put a detached, structure in their backyard. I think it's much easier to read, so I'm very happy with the way that it looks and flows, and I think it'll reduce a lot of questions that we get.
Have you stress tested with some of the more challenging cases you had in the last few years?
No, but we did have all of us ladies reviewed the entire documents from front to back, but we also had the planning intern review them to kind of bring a perspective from, a regular citizen. And so he had a lot of questions, so we were really trying to capture, is this easy for someone not familiar with the zoning code to read and interpret?
Okay.
So we did have quite a few comments. And the consultant's been incorporating those. Like I said, we're looking forward to receiving comments from the Planning Commission and the City Council so we can get a final draft going. But it is addressing a lot of issues in the antiquated zone that we have that, we just update regularly, just the sections that need updating. So this is definitely going to solve probably about 30 or 40 problems that we have between inconsistencies or just addressing more modern issues.
How are the universal design standards incorporated? Is that just copied into this document, or is it reference it as far as what those designs need to be?
Like the objective design
Objective
standards?
design standards.
Yeah,
yes.
so that actually this consultant actually worked on the objective design standards so that they're incorporating what was adopted.
Okay. And then at the end product, the staff going to end up with a nice editable document, for 20 years from now, if they have to make changes and it updates that, city staff will be able to do that.
Well, I mean, it still has to go through the process and through.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
through,
just,
through Muni code and, but
Okay.
yeah, it'll be much easier because we have to copy a page and then try to edit it, and the formatting is,
Yeah.
not friendly.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I think I just have one, just related to, I know it was mentioned earlier in the presentation that they looked at a lot of the other plans and tried to incorporate those into this document. And specifically for downtown, does this document help us get where we need to go with downtown?
Yes, so we are trying to address some issues. Our downtown code is not very old. It's was incorporated into the 2040 general plan, so our downtown zoning has been in place for about 4 years. So we do recognize that there are changes that need to be made. So we are incorporating those as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. And I did want to clarify that we do have our open hours to the public, but again, for the commissioners, please feel free to reach out to any planning staff at any time that you want to kind of go over comments or if you have questions.
This is a non sequitur I do in the sign section, like all the pictures from San Luis Obispo. It's they've always had like very their downtown their downtown. I've always felt has kind of just been something to really kind of shoot for. Went to school up there for a long time and seen how it's kind of grown and changed, and it's kind of fun to see some of these locations again.
Yeah, I will. I'll just add to that. Jen is in San Luis Obispo, and Abby went to school in San Luis Obispo as well. I lived there for a year, so I can't say that all the graphics are from San Luis Obispo necessarily. And Jen, feel free to chime in. But yeah, we do of course use we prepare graphics as needed for clients, but if we have something that works, we use that as well. So
No,
go ahead,
good.
Jen.
They're good. I came across Pizza Solo. I'm like, oh yeah, I used to eat there.
Well, if we have no further questions, I believe that we don't have any action to take on this item, correct?
That's correct. So just please, like I said, reach out to us or the peer review consultant. We can get you contact information. But we are both teams are happy to help you through this review process.
Is there anywhere that you would like us to particularly focus on?
I would say B and C. C is the big one.
Okay.
I think it's a little over 300 pages, or no, close to 300? Yeah,
Okay.
that's the tough one, but that's kind of where the meat is. E is the definitions, so, but I think B and D, C are the ones to take. Can't talk. It's my third, it's our third night meeting in a row. The ones to pay attention to, but again, we're happy to go over in general what the other ones were about or any comments that we had.
Wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stefano. We appreciate you and your team joining us for this presentation. And I think with that, if we have no further business, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting here at 6:31 p.m.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.